the second part of this is a workshop. So I'm going to introduce Lisa. Okay, so Hislop is a professional editor specializing in the preparation of short stories, anthologies, and collections for submission, query, and publication. She offers editing services, story coaching, and workshops, all aimed towards the mastery of short story form. Lisa is an ambassador for Editors Canada. She holds a certificate in editing from Simon Fraser University and a BA in French literature from the University of British Columbia. Welcome, Lisa, and enjoy the workshop.
Hey, so hello, and welcome to From Reading Stories to Writing Them. As Emily said, my name is Lisa Hislop, and I am a professional editor specializing in short stories, collections, and anthologies. Within SCI I run the virtual weekly book club and the monthly writers group. Outside of SCI I run a near daily write-in where my writers come and have a couple of hours to write in silence together. We have a weekly critique group and a monthly accountability group and short story club. But tonight, we're focusing on getting started with writing. Over the next hour, we're going to talk about how to make the leap from reading stories to writing them. We're going to start with what you know about stories from reading and watching TV, or maybe what you don't know that you know. Then we're going to fill in what you might not know. And we're going to learn how to apply all of this to writing your own story. So I want to begin by thinking about the last book that you read, or the last TV series, or the last movie. And I want you to decide in your head whether you would give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You don't have to defend your decision. Just go with your first instinct.
Thanks, Lisa. This is Mary Jo. I just read a book called Playing Big by Tara Moore. It's a coaching kind of a maybe not self-help, but just a coaching book about coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Give the thumbs up. She's a great author as well as really good subject matter. And I tend to gravitate more to nonfiction than fiction in general.
That is okay, because story writing, the storytelling is kind of the same in both.
Yeah.
Nonfiction work has to be compelling. It has to have a story that we can relate to. And so a lot of the same techniques are used. So that's great. That's great. Thank you for that thumbs up there. Anyone else want to share?
I'll share. I am a big fan of noir fiction because it seems to have a sense of place. Like the city it's set in is almost one of the characters. And I'm a big fan of Sam Weeb, who's a Vancouver area writer. And his last in his series about Wakeland, which is his detective, was so good, and I loved it. And then I read his first book, and I'm just finishing now, of his non-Wakeland fiction, and I feel like I love it still, but it gives me a sense of how difficult it is to start a whole new world and character, because it's the first one I think he's written that's a novel that wasn't Wakeland, and it's missing a little something. So it kind of, I still love it because I still love what he does, but it was like, oh, now I see you need time to build that. So
awesome. Thank you, Jocelyn. You have skipped ahead in some of my slides. I love it. So that's great. That's great. Anyone else want to share? Yeah, Susan.
Hi, thank you. Well, I'm in a couple of book clubs. Actually, we have done Keiko's book with the one book club that I've been in with for 30 years. but the other one that I'm in that I haven't been in too long, we just read Rose in Bloom. It's set in Japan, and there's only 5 people in the group, and I don't know, someone just picked it and it was fine. But I kind of was drawn to it because well, I want to honor the commitment to be in the book club, but also I'm going to Japan soon. So, and I would give it a thumbs up. It was very beautifully written. It was translated actually, and it was very beautifully written, and it was about yeah, the subject matter was interesting for me, but it also gave me some really beautiful, vivid pictures of Japan, and also I got the feeling of tranquility and serenity.
Thank you. That's so good. Okay, so I'm going to narrow down my question a little bit just so that we don't run out of time before we get to the goods. So if we can keep it to the title and the thumbs up or thumbs down, there will be a chance to talk a little bit later about why. And so try and keep that part minimal so that we have some of that to share in the future. So I think Roderick, you popped on. Did you want to go?
Sure. One of the book clubs, we did Still Life by Louise Penny. So yeah, and I liked it. It was good.
Good. So you give
Thumbs
that
up.
a thumbs up.
That's it.
Good. Great.
There's also a comment in the chat from Avery who said she's almost done reading Girl, Woman, Other, and she gives it a thumbs up as well. Hope I got the title right.
Thank you. That's
I
great.
want to recommend, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I wanted to recommend the book called The Pain Project by Clara Stanley.
Okay. And you give that one a thumbs up too.
10 thumbs.
10 thumbs up. That's great. Okay, good.
I'll
Anyone
echo
else?
I'll echo what Bonnie said. I just started that as well. I work with Simon, who's her partner, with the Vancouver Adapted Music Society, and no, it's a fantastic book about their journey and very real too.
Great. Great. Okay. Good. Any other final comments before we go forward?
I was just going to add, I'm reading a lot of poetry, and I have for a long time, and I think it balances out my nonfiction kind of propensity. And I'm reading a lot of David White, and I've been working with him lately, so I'm going to give him a thumbs up too.
Nice. Okay, good. I love how these have turned into like a little bit of a shout out. It's so good because this is where we get our book recommendations. So I thank you. Thank you. Okay. So we have a pretty discerning group here. We know what we like, we know what we don't like. So let's take it apart a little bit. Let's get into what the thumbs up or thumbs down is about. So I'm gonna did I go? Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, everything's just, I don't know, guys. I think I'm just gonna let that exist on there, and I'm gonna tell you what's in my head. Okay, so in my mind, when I am critiquing a piece that I'm going to be working on, I'm looking at two things. I'm looking at enjoyment and I'm looking at satisfaction. So this first idea of enjoyment has to do with personal taste. It's not really something you have to defend, because the key word is personal. You might be able to identify a reason that you like the book. You find the plot line intriguing, the character relatable, the information is generous and useful, the world is immersive, or you might just like it. In a critique, I think of this as my subjective opinion. In terms of satisfaction, this is the second part. This is whether the story satisfies my expectations throughout the story and always at the end of the story. So I try as much as I can in figuring out whether it satisfies my expectations, to leave my personal opinions aside and think about the general reader, whoever this book was written for. And from there, I asked the question of whether the story satisfies that reader's expectations or leaves them with unanswered questions at the end. Obviously, as humans, we can't completely leave our feelings out of it, but the goal here is to judge the story on whether it does its job. And so tonight we're going to talk about fiction, partially because a lot of us read fiction, we watch TV, we've watched movies, like everybody has read something fiction. Not everyone has read a memoir, or not everyone has read a nonfiction book. So we're gonna try that. And so this time we're gonna go around the room again, and we're gonna do it in two separate parts. We're gonna say whether we felt the book was enjoyable and whether we felt that it worked. But I don't want you to worry about, wait, how do I know if it worked or not? Because that is what we're going to get into tonight. I just want you to think about when you finish the book, were you like, oh, yeah. Or were you sort of thinking, I don't know if that quite answered all of my questions, or I don't know if that quite, there's something missing. Jocelyn kind of put that one in there. So let's just quickly go around and we'll think about the same book again and whether you enjoyed it and whether it was satisfying. So I will start. So even though I loved the fifth Bopaverse book, I didn't find it satisfying. So it's a thumbs up for me for sure, but it wasn't satisfying. It was missing something.
Yeah, I actually, the thing that I really need often when I'm reading is to be emotionally connected. And so the book that I was talking about was satisfying, but I mean, I thought it was good writing, but I didn't get emotionally connected with it.
Okay, thank you. Who's next?
I could say I said it a bit earlier, but reflecting on that, I think the thing that is missing from Ocean Drive, which is the one I felt was a little less satisfying, is that I don't think that the character has as much motivation or like need to solve the puzzle or get to the end of the story as the other character in the previous series did. And that's why it feels just a little unmoored.
Yeah. So the character's desire and motivation just felt a little bit unsatisfying. Yes, that's great. That's great. Anyone else? Roderick, go ahead.
So, as I said, I enjoyed Still Life. It's a murder mystery. And yeah, the characters were engaging and it was well written, and it mostly worked. So it yeah, I guess some of the way the murder was solved it was just like a bit too much of a stretch, but yeah, I don't know. Would most readers be that critical of it, depending on how much murder mystery they read? New to the genre, it's a little bit. It's like not so sure that does strain the bounds of credulity a bit here. So
okay,
almost.
Yeah, almost. So this brings up an important point that I think in the publishing world, so in writing, in editing, in all of these various little parts of publishing, a lot of us have the sense that we don't know enough to have an opinion. And that's not true. Every story that I edit, I send a a questionnaire out. And on that questionnaire is a question. It's my favorite. It is, what do you not like about your story? There's a whole bunch of other questions, including what do you like about it? But what do you not like about your story? And almost every single writer, because I read these after I do my assessment of the story, almost every single writer doesn't like something that I have, as a person who I would say I'm kind of an expert. I'm a professional. This is what I do for my living. And every single writer will say at least one thing that I've already named. And we're talking like beginner writers. People are like, this is my first story. I don't know anything. I don't know. And they're kind of shitting all over themselves. And then when I get in there, I'm like, no, you do know. And so trust me, you have enough understanding of story from all of the years that you've been exposed to story in its various different ways to know whether something works or not. And so, Roderick, with yours, I bet you anything that people who are really into the murder mysteries are a little bit driven crazy by the things that are missing, because they're even more attuned to what kind of should be there. So trust yourselves. I'm going to keep saying that tonight, but trust yourselves. Anyone else want to pipe up about the satisfaction end of their book? Okay. So this is awesome. Everything that you've said is awesome, because what you need to know, in alignment with what I just said, is that when you can consider a story appealing or not appealing and still acknowledge whether it works or doesn't work, when you can separate those two things out, you are more discerning than 90% of armchair reviewers out there. There are people who will go into rate a book and they will give it like 1 star because they didn't like the book. They didn't enjoy it, when maybe there is merit to the book, and because they didn't like it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to like tear down the writer's reviews. And so I think we've made great strides. I mean, this took me most of my undergraduate degree to realize that just because I didn't like something didn't mean that it wasn't good. And just because I like something didn't mean that it was good. So congratulations. And I'm glad that you're already reaching into trusting yourself in that way. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get into some of the why. There's a lot of things that happen in a story that may or may not be satisfying. But what we want to do is we want to kind of step back and look at the big picture and the big elements of the story and check and see if they're there, because usually that's where the problem lies when we're looking at stories, and in the future when we're looking at our own stories. So here, I'm sure you all recognize this from some point in your life, probably grade 9 English class, where your teacher said, this is what a story looks like. And traditional stories do often follow this, the order of this. More modern stories will mix things up a little bit, but all of these elements they're always there, whether they are written in, whether they are implied, whether they are on purpose not mentioned, they are part of what makes the story whole. And so I'm going to go into a little bit just explaining each one of these things so that when you write your own story, whether it is a memoir or whether it is a fiction story, you are able to see how the parts come together to make the story work. Okay. So here we have the introduction. So the introduction helps the reader transition into the world of the story. It introduces the main character, their status quo, why the reader should invest in them, all while setting the scene for the inciting incident to occur. And that's the next part. So the next time that you read a book, you can notice that if there is an introductory part, if it doesn't just jump right to the inciting incident, which sometimes it does, the author is purposely laying these pieces out so that you can invest in the book. Okay, so next we have the inciting incident. So the inciting incident is an event that poses an irresistible problem or question, giving the character no choice but to leave the comfort of their status quo and head into the story. What happens at the inciting incident point is the character can't really go back from that. And this question or problem that is posed is essentially what is driving the plot. That's what the plot is about. The plot is about the conflict, is driving the story forward. And where does it drive it? Into the rising action. So if we think about that triangle, the hike up toward the climax of the story is filled with little events. They're a series of tension building events where the character attempts to solve their problem or question. Each event fails to resolve the issue, but provides new information and often inspiration for the next attempt. So if you think about the three little pigs, when the first little pig's house gets blown down, there's our inciting incident. The little pig runs off to their sister's house and they start building another house. That's your rising action. We've upped the risk. There's a bit more tension because there's now two pigs that could get eaten. And at the same time, they're putting more work into the house and using better materials. And so we're like, okay, maybe this will work. The tension is building. And so that's what the rising action does. And depending on how long the story is, you might have several events where you're building toward the answer to this question or to solve this problem. And then in a short story, you might just have 2 or 3 small things that happen that the character has to kind of fight their way through to get to that success or failure at the end. Okay. So then we have the climax. We all love a good climax. So usually this begins with the character at a complete loss for what to do. This final, usually successful, but sometimes it fails, attempts to solve the problem or issue requires everything the character has to succeed. And so one thing that we haven't really touched on is character arc, but because someone did mention like how important that character is, and another person mentioned how important it is that their emotions are involved in the story, the character at the point of the inciting incident usually has a little inciting incident inside themselves at the same time. So something happens in the story that like jars the reader out of their status quo, or jars the character out of their status quo, and then they have their own pushback inside where they're like, no, I don't want to do that, or I can't do that, or whatever. By the time they arrive at the climax, they have to, at the same time as deal with their problem, overcome the problem of their own character arc. And so this is where this idea of like the character being as low as like lower than they have been in the whole story, it creates this contrast between the success of the climax and that painful moment and what the character had to do. They really had to put themselves in there. And you'll notice that even good memoirs, especially memoirs where, where we're talking about people having massive breakthroughs in their own mental health or things like that, that climax is contrasting those two things. And so, again, all of our storytelling techniques are always transferable. So we've got the climax, and that's at the top of the triangle there. And then once the problem is either solved or has been proven to be unsolvable, we move into the resolution. So win or lose, we leave the reader with the sense that the story is over. So usually that looks like the character is attempting to reintegrate with their status quo, which might not be going well. But it also leaves you with this sense that the world is continuing, unless you're Buffy. So at the same time, this is when you're kind of wrapping up any of the subplots or character arcs that have arisen along the way, little issues or problems that the reader's going, oh, I wonder what happened with that. That's usually where that gets wrapped up. I want to go back to that drawing back here. So it is a lot easier to see these things in books and movies and TV shows that you didn't write. It is hard to look at your own writing objectively and be able to see what is missing, which is why it's great to have a writing group where you can critique each other. But if you practice seeing it in other stories, in TV shows, in movies, then you will be able to see it in your own. You will be able to say, okay, does my story have an inciting incident? Does it raise a question that eventually gets answered? Does each of the rising actions have to do with that question? Or do I kind of wander off over here and start answering a different question? Does the resolution bring that sense of closure to the character reintegrating back into whatever part of their life remains? Those sorts of things. If you look at that in a story that you didn't write, it becomes a lot easier to see it in your own. Okay. So now, this is a lot. You learned many things to look for, but I encourage you to think about the book that you read and wonder, oh, was there a part of those 5 things that was missing or that was a little light on detail? And that's why I didn't feel totally immersed in the story. Does anyone want to speak on that about their book? You don't have to. It is a lot of pressure to take what you've learned and then immediately apply it. But if you do, I would love to hear it.
I wonder if the book that I'm reading that's not super satisfying is just going too slowly up the hill toward the climax for me. And so some of the motivation and the stakes haven't shown themselves. Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm pretty close to the end, so they're gonna have to like wrap that up quick, but
Exactly. No, that is definitely one of the sort of internal aspects of the story. Like we've sort of zoomed out to these 5 kind of parts of story anatomy, but if pacing isn't on point, so that feeling, the speed at which the story is coming at you doesn't feel fast enough or slow enough or alternate between the two, that can really challenge a book to be successful. Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking of a book I read before the last one.
Mm-hmm.
It just dragged. It just had like, it just seemed to have so much irrelevance in it.
Mm-hmm.
And like, come on, just cut to the chase. So yeah, it just dragged a lot, and it could have been tightened. Could have been tightened a lot.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I edit short stories. I gotta tell you, because everything has to be super tight, and that's what I love. If I'm reading a novel that goes slow, I will close it. I won't torture myself with that. Roderick, did you have a thought?
Is it possible to put the diagram up again?
Absolutely, yes. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna go like this because then I can see it. Bam, there it is.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess the things that did work, in the introduction, the inciting incident was almost within the first paragraph with the identification of a dead person. But dead person becomes a character that you learn more and more about. But the detective is the main character that you're learning more and more about. Rising action, there's lots of subplots within there, many different characters, lots of red herrings for where the who might have committed the murder and why, building towards the climax. And yeah, there was there was a literary trick in the climax, where the one of the characters seems to have figured out who actually has done the murder and goes to confront the murderer. But the narrator is not telling us who she is actually speaking to. And the narrator is leading us to believe that it's her husband that she's talking to. But it actually turns out, several paragraphs into it, that oh no, it is actually the husband's best friend. And it's like, okay, yeah, it kind of works. Wouldn't work in a movie, because you would see who you're talking to. So that it just the climax was just like, yeah, a little bit rough there. And then in the resolution part, when the brilliant detective is explaining how all the pieces fit together, there's a few bits that are just like, yeah, but that doesn't quite add up. And so that it didn't feel sort of comfortably resolved. But yeah, like in terms of the satisfaction of it, those would be the criticisms. But yeah, the enjoyment was still strong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sometimes you can have like great pacing, interesting, fun characters. A story doesn't have to be 100% good to be publishable. That's not, I mean, it's awesome when it is, but it's very rare. Often you will have kind of three different stories. You'll have the story where the character is so amazing that you just can't put it down. Then you have the plot line that just takes you to this other place, and you're so you can't put it down. Or you might have the writer's style that is just so beautiful or so clever or so funny or so whatever that you're willing to, deal with a little bit of a rough character or a little bit of a little plot hole here or there. So yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just, it's good if there's like one element that really holds it all together. That is true. Okay. Anyone else have thoughts before we move on? Okay. Okay. So let's move this guy along here. We will head down to the writing process. So the whole point of why we are here, why we are talking tonight, is to get to that creative writing process. And so there are lots of books on the creative writing process. But the basic gist is that there's two steps. First, you write. All the stuff that you just learned and that we just talked about, you forget about all of that. You get yourself out of the way of the words that are in your head and you get them on the page. That's the goal of the creative writing process. And that's maybe the harder part for us adults to grok. The next part is the revision. So all that stuff we just talked about, now it's time to let it shine. You're going to read over your piece. You're going to see if it works, if it has all the parts, by overlaying the elements of the story and see if you can pick them out. And if something's missing, you'll flesh it out. And if it's all there, good, you've got your first draft, you're ready to share it and get some opinions of readers. So the second idea here is much more action oriented than the first. I think that's why it's a little easier to grok. But the first one can make the adult brain a little bit uncomfortable because we are used to being in control and having all of the answers, and this whole idea of like, get out of your own way and just let the words flow. What? How do I do that? So I have concocted, since I mostly work with adults, a little, if I can turn the page here, okay, a little series of steps called Writing for the Adult Brain. So first I'm going to give you something that's kind of interesting about writers. It's called plot versus pants. So writers often divide themselves into two camps, plotters and pantsers. And these are real words that people use. You can Google it. Plotters, because they plot out their stories before they start writing. And pantsers, because they write by the seat of their pants. No plan, they just start. And so this step here doesn't mean that you have to pick one of these. It just means that you can release yourself from any shoulds that you have inside. Often in school, we hear you have to outline and then you write. But that doesn't work for every person. Some people need that. Some people need to say, okay, in chapter 1, this is what's going to happen. In chapter 1, scene 1, this, chapter 1, scene 2, this, chapter 1, scene 3, this, and then they go in and they free write in there. They let it all flow, but they have a little container that they live in. Other people, one of my close dear friends, she's an author. She's published several novels. She does not do that. She sits down and she just starts writing, and she writes and she writes and she writes until the story is done. And once she told me, she was like, I was writing a story about these women and I was about 14,000 words in, and they encounter this man, and I realized that man is the main character of the story. And all those 14,000 words were she just had to put them aside and start writing about this character who she knew was the character in the story. And I was like, wow, that's amazing to be able to let go of that. But for her, that's how she discovers her stories. And she's like, it's fine. If there's thousands of words that don't get used, it was necessary for me to get where I needed to go. So anywhere in between there is totally fine. When I write, I'm a pantser at the beginning. I just write and write and write. And then I sit down and I make an outline. And then I go in and I flesh out each part by itself. That's how I work. So the first step is to just let go of the shoulds and allow yourself to be anywhere on that spectrum. The second part is Once you've done whatever planning you need to do, if you're a plotter, then we move on to step 2, which is letting go. We want to create an environment where you can get out of your own way. So what I recommend is that you set a timer. 20 minutes is usually a good amount of time, because the first 10 minutes you're just kind of freaking out, and then by the second 10 minutes you're sitting down and you're writing. But for the beginning, 10 minutes is great. Once you press go, write continuously whatever comes to your mind, even if it doesn't make sense. No stopping, no hesitating, no editing, no spell checking, none of this. Just write and write and write. And the goal here is to tune fully into the words that are coming into your brain. And if no words are coming in, just write that. The reason I recommend this is not because I have some nefarious goal. The reason I recommend this is because often what will happen is we'll have so many ideas coming in at the same time that if you stop and stumble over a word, you'll forget that other idea. And it is devastating when you do. And so this practice of letting the ideas flow as quickly as they're coming without trying to fix them at all allows you to not have that happen as often. And remember, making sense of what's on the page is just not part of the creative process. That's part of the revising process. And so you can say to yourself, okay, yeah, editor, internal editor, you're doing great, but I'm just going to ask you to sit over there and we'll get to you when we get to the revising, because that's when you're there to shine. And then step 3, this is the most simple but difficult task that a writer faces. Starting. You can spend a lifetime avoiding writing by procrastinating with writing related things. You can set up your writing space. You can find the right writing software. You can read books on writing. You can gather inspiration. You can plan your story. You can hang out with other writers and talk about why you can't write. You could technically never write and totally be a writer. But in the end, you won't learn anything about your writing until you start. So remember, all you need is your brain, a way to get the words on the page, and the willpower to start. So you can see what I mean by simple but difficult. So knowing that, I'm wondering if you would want to try writing. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But for those of you who are giving me thumbs up and nods and stuff, get yourself situated so that you have a little piece of paper, or mute yourself so you can use your Dragon or whatever software you use. Just get ready to get some words on the page. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a writing prompt. Writers will often use writing prompts for short stories, sometimes for the short story. There's writing prompts that you can get from magazines that you can write, as long as it's about that prompt, you can write it all up, edit it up, and send it in and get it published. And so that's one of the fun ways to participate in writing. But it's also a great little exercise for those days when you're feeling like, I want to practice writing a certain number of times a week, but right now I have nothing to say. If you Google writing prompts, there's millions of them, and you can do it in your favorite genre. You can be like speculative fiction writing prompts, mystery writing prompts. There's tons of them out there. And so today we're just going to do a little writing prompt, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, you don't even have to read it out loud if you don't want to. But if you do, you can, of course. Okay, so I'm going to put the writing prompt up on the screen so you can see it, and then I'm going to read it out so that you can hear it. So if you're the type of person who just wants to sit with your eyes closed and like let it happen, now's your time. Okay. So here's your prompt. You are certain that your new colleague at work is the adult version of your childhood imaginary friend. So remember, I don't want you to think about any of the things you just learned. I just want you to write whatever comes to your head. And I will start the timer now. Okay. Take a deep breath. Finish your line that you were writing. And let your breath out. You did it. You started. How was that? How did it feel? I'm seeing some nods, so I feel like it was satisfying in some way.
Trying not to overthink, I think, was the challenge. Just jump in.
Yeah. Just get out of your own way.
So no, boy, did not find it satisfying because I had to imagine an imaginary friend.
Oh.
Kid, it's like, hey, it was like okay, we're two levels of unreality here. It was a struggle. Got a bunch of words down, but it was a struggle.
Yes. Oh, that's hilarious because I was like, oh, I got a good one because I had an imaginary. Okay, good. Well, thank you for bearing with me, Roderick. I appreciate it. Does anyone else want to share their experience?
I'll just share. I often I'm Mary Jo here. Have to get a pen to a splint to be able to write with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing it digitally just doesn't often satisfy that writing sense of fulfillment. So I'll just say that right off the top. But in a case like today where I don't have that, I used to, when I was working on my book, I used the Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way technique a lot. I found that to be so good for me. It's just don't think, just keep writing, don't put your pen down. You've got, to write 3 full pages. And so that's kind of the approach I took here.
That's fantastic. What a good book to bring up, Mary Jo, because Mary Jo, right? It says MJ.
Yeah. Either one. I'll answer to both.
Okay, good. I did that book when my brother bought it for me when I graduated university because I did a literature degree, so I was completely lost. So The Artist's Way does in there recommend writing for 3 pages without lifting your pen, just brain puking. And wow, it's pretty amazing. Once you get into the practice of doing that every single day, it's nuts. So good mention. Anyone else have thoughts about yeah, Susan, you're muted.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I like The Artist's Way, the morning papers as well. And a workshop I almost went to a few years ago was Natalie Goldberg, and I've got some of her books, and she's got all sorts of chapters, and she'll just say apples, blah blah blah. Think about as a child, or blah 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 blah. Go, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And so I've done a lot of that. So yeah, you give me something and it's just like there's always something that you can connect with when you've had a little bit of experience like that, and I'm grateful for that.
Awesome. That's so great. Yes, the more you practice working with prompts, the more it's like your brain is ready for it and it's excited. I find with prompts like this that kind of give you a couple of characters, I'll write a little bit and then I'll say, okay, now I'm going to introduce a conflict, and I pick a conflict like one of them has a secret, or one of them has to ask the other one for help, or something that creates a conflict, and then I will kind of play around with how that conflict works, and any questions that that brings up, and I'll just sort of kind of create my own little path through that story triangle, that allows me to play with story technique and writing, and pushing myself through, okay, well, what would the inciting incident, what could an inciting incident look like in this case, or what could the rising action look like, like what kind of problems might they encounter trying to solve their problem, that kind of thing. There's all sorts of things you can do to prompt yourself when you're writing, and give yourself basically like a little container within which to let go. Because like I said, as an adult, that's a little bit chaotic feeling, and it's nice to have a container. So, okay, good. Any other thoughts about the process? Does anyone want to read what they've written? Because I always like to make sure that people have the opportunity. Susan, yeah.
Yeah, I can.
I would love it if you would. Yeah.
Oh my God, this is surreal. Beth, the new woman at work, reminds me so much of Kathy Sinclair. I feel obsessed with her. I want to just keep asking questions, find out everything about her. It's taking over me, yet I'm worried I will scare her away by my weirdness. I can't think of anything else. I'm thinking of contacting Kathy to see if she's still Kathy. I know how to get a hold of her, although I haven't seen her in years. I feel I'm going crazy with this obsession. I can't let it go. I just need to know. I'm hoping something will come up that shoots the whole theory in the foot, something like that will help let it go. But in the meantime, I just feel so needy of finding out more.
I love that, because I think why I love that, it's because you are describing the neediness so well, and then at the end you say it. And I feel like the whole time in my mind I'm trying to imagine what's going on for this character, and then when you say it at the end, it confirms that I was on the right track. It just felt so satisfying. So well done. Very well done. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? And even if you don't want to read, maybe you want to talk about your take on it. How did you have them meet face to face? Did you have the person like Susan? Were you talking about the experience? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, this is always a very personal aspect of writers workshops, because 5 minutes isn't a very long time. Usually when we do workshops, we workshop for a couple of hours. We do 1 5-minute one to sort of warm up, and then we do a couple of more short or longer ones, and then we do maybe some ones where I'll throw 2 or 3 prompts at you as you're writing one story. Those kinds of things, they kind of get us warmed up. So yeah, just the fact that you got words on the page, that's exactly what we were looking for. And so to wrap up this evening, I want to just go back to some touch points. I want to think about that starting is hard, and especially for the adult. I think children, you're like, do you want to write a story? They're like, okay. Adults were like, oh, well, yeah, but how do I know if it's actually a story? Like, there's so many things. And so we went over some of that, and we learned that you don't need all of that information to begin. Once you get that pen on the paper, let the words flow. the making sense of the words can happen later. And then number 3, make sense of the words. You can start by comparing them to the 5 elements of story that we talked about and be like, oh, hey, I have a pretty good introduction and inciting incident here. Now I want to move into the rising action. And then you can kind of put that revision brain away and see if you can come up with a couple of failed solutions to your problem and work at it that way. And 4th, what I said at the beginning is that you know so much more about story than you think. You've been listening to people tell stories for your whole life. You've been watching TV, you've been reading books, you've been watching movies, you've been listening to your parents telling gossipy stories on the phone. You've been telling gossipy stories on the phone. You've been watching TikToks, and all of these things are all forms of storytelling. You know when it's good. You know when you like it. You know when you're satisfied. Trust that. And then as you begin to write and as you get your words on the page and you find yourself with a draft, find a buddy to read it to. Because even if we start out writing for ourselves, usually we are writing because we want someone to read it. And the way that we get better at writing is by asking our readers, by checking out their facial expressions as we're telling them the story. That's how it worked around the fire way back in the day, is that people would sit around, they would tell stories, and that storyteller, you can bet, is like, Jim's falling asleep again. I must not be pacing this very well. And so then they go back to the drawing board and speed up that rising action, or they make a better contrast in the climax, or whatever it is. They're watching their audience. We don't have that as much these days. And so if you can find yourself a little writing group, which we have at Spinal Cord Injury BC every first Wednesday of the month, you can come and you can read your piece to us. And we are like the kindest people in our critiques. Roderick can attest. You can come and read your work and we'll talk about it. We'll be like, okay, this was great. We'll tell you what was good. We'll tell you how you can strengthen it and what we were hoping for. And you can hear our stories. It's a fun way to share and be in community. And if you want to just practice hearing more stories, we've got a book club too. Every Monday, we meet from 6 till 7. And you can always reach out to me, or you can check the events calendar on SCI BC. So I hope that has inspired you to keep putting proverbial pen to proverbial paper. And feel free anytime to get in touch with me. You can reach me at lisa@theshortstoryeditor.com. And I would love to hear what you're writing. I would love to hear how things are going and talk writing with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a really great workshop, little kind of a bite-sized picture of your sessions, and a nice sort of, I think, low stakes and practice. So I just want to thank you for being willing to come and do this in this setting. And also, I know that Linda has dropped off, but I just wanted to thank Keiko and Mary Jo again, and really, really appreciate Keiko and Mary Jo for sharing your own process and your words with us. And one thing I really love hearing about is the mentors that you look to and worked with to get where you are now, and who have brought your book babies to life. So I think that's very encouraging to realize that, books aren't necessarily a solitary process, and that kind of is a great opportunity for mentorship and peer support as well. So We so appreciate you both, and I hope your books are an amazing success. And I have a whole list now of things I need to read. And again, thanks everyone for coming out. Thank you so much.